just under an inch from the edge, and there is another one. Slice number 2. Buongiorno, my son and his girlfriend are coming for dinner tonight, and I'm gonna be doing a pasta dish which is almost 2 meals in one. Just like a lot of my other dishes, I've learned this from my mom. This is something that she used to cook a lot when we were young, and so I'll be replicating pretty much the recipe. This is a brisket joint, and it weighs just under 900 grams, and I'm going to be stuffing it. And the first thing I want to do is to remove part of it, going in with a sharp knife. And if you look at my movement, I'm going up and down. Ensure that your knife is nice and sharp, and I'm cutting out a hole in the shape of a cylinder. As long as your knife is nice and sharp, you will find that this is really easy to do. And I have invested here, Julie, do you mind focusing on this? On this stone, it's about 10 pounds. It's the best thing that I can have in my kitchen. Let me know if you would like me to show you how I sharpen my knives, and I'll do a video for you. They're dead easy. So having finished this side, I'm now going to switch over, and I'll go on the other side and find the hole, and I'll do exactly the same. It doesn't have to be perfect, by the way, it's just enough to ensure that you can remove the middle part. Ironically, my mum used to get a butcher to do this for her, and come home with a piece of joint which was already with a hole. But occasionally that would be something that she would think afterwards, and she would ask me to do it. And I used to love it as a young lad. And this should be ready to come out now, having done it both sides. If I go in and pull it with my fingers, you might have to go back with your knife and tie it up, and there it is. The middle part is out. I will leave this as it is for the time being, and I'll show you what to do later. And I'll start working on the filling next. I'm going to be using some ham, or you can use pancetta or bacon. My mum used to use pancetta very often, but also ham was one of her other ingredients. Entirely up to you really, your choices, but do make sure that it is a pork-based product. Just a couple of slices, as the hole to fill is not going to be very big. And I'll start moving my ingredients in a glass bowl. Cheese, this is cheddar. Again, quantity is entirely up to you, but I'm going to be using a couple of good chunks, like so. And I'll cut it into little strips first. And I'm now making some very small cubes, approximately 1/2 centimeter in size. Some of you have asked, why do you have such a big Chinese knife? You can see why. It's so easy to just pick everything as you go along. This is pecorino cheese, so you can also use Parmesan cheese, entirely up to you what you use. I've got pecorino in the fridge at the moment, so that's what I'm using. I go 2 or 3 handfuls. And next ingredient is going to be an egg. And I'll break that in. I've put pecorino in, which is quite salty, so I'm not going to be adding any further salt, but I will add a little pepper. Followed by a very generous handful of parsley. This is frozen from the freezer.
And from my garden.
Yes, from the garden.
I went a bit mad last year. I had about 5 plants, and so we've had tons of it for the winter. It's fabulous.
I'm going to be adding some breadcrumbs in a moment, but I left them specifically for last so that I can adjust the consistency. So I'll mix everything first. And if you have watched any of my other videos, I often use breadcrumbs. That is a very typical Sicilian thing to do. 3 dessertspoons to start with.
In Sicily, it's quite a thing where they have fresh bread every day. It's like a given. Yeah. They go to the bakers and they get fresh bread, and then whatever's left over, they leave in chunks on the side, and they dry it out, and then they make breadcrumbs. So
yes,
waste not, want not.
No, and often my mum will make everything with kind of fresh breadcrumbs, she calls it, because I dry mine and I then use as and when. Whereas my mum, as Julie said, they buy bread, fresh bread every day. That is a daily cultural thing. And then any leftover she will use as breadcrumbs. But I think this is perfect. I've added a feathered dessertspoon, and yeah, they're good. Look, not too moist, but just perfect. And back to my joint. I'll put it flat on one end so that I can start picking up my filling and stuff the hole. And as I put it in, I'm compacting it well with my fingers to ensure that the joint is filled up with breadcrumbs and everything else. And don't worry, you can be fairly firm, because all you're doing, you're making the joint expand, and it's got some string here, so it's not going to go anywhere. And I'll stop just under an inch from the edge. Let's turn it around. And I'll make sure that I get a similar finish in there. And back to the piece I moved earlier, I'll remove one end like so, and I'll do the same on the other side. I'll go on top with my knife and give it a gentle squash, both pieces. And I'm going to be patching my meat now, so I'll put it on top.
Oh, there he goes. These trusty toothpicks. These come out most days.
So I'm going to be putting 4 toothpicks for each end. And I'll leave a little bit so that I can get hold of it when I need to remove it later once it's cooked. And literally I will insert it, and I'll make sure that I go in and stab the little piece of meat which I've just added.
So you're not coming out the top. I can't see this toothpick coming out the top. It's just going in. You can feel it.
Just going in.
Yeah,
yes.
you can just feel it comes through the meat.
It's going into the meat, and
Yeah.
it will hold this piece in its place. And this is my last toothpick, my 4th one. And I'll push them in so that they are almost invisible, but we know they're there. And I will repeat the exercise for the other side. And now that I've got my cap, I can press this a little bit harder. If you put more than 4 toothpicks, by all means do, but make sure you count them, because you will want to make sure that when you remove them, you remove the same number that you've added. I've got some horrible stories I could tell you about toothpicks, but I'm not going to today. That's why I'm always very, very cautious. They're not pleasant to find in your meal if you do not remove them.
Or more importantly, not pleasant to find in your mouth or your throat, I guess.
Indeed. Okay, so this is done, and the second side is also finished. And let's take a look. It's a small joint, so I'm happy that my strings here will be holding it together. But if you find that it's a little bit loose, you can add some cooking wire, if you like, additional to what you already got. Or indeed, if your joint doesn't come with cooking wire, you might want to put a little cooking wire to make sure that it stays in one piece. I will be making a soffritto in a little while, but before I go there, I want to seal the meat. So I've got a pot here on the go, which is the same pot I will be using when I cook my joint, and I will add a fairly generous amount of olive oil, as this will serve for the soffritto also. And my oil is nice and hot, and I'll start by sealing the ends first. So I'll just put it down, and I'll turn it around on itself to ensure that it doesn't get stuck to the bottom, and this is about 20 to 30 seconds. And that is enough, if I show you, enough to seal the whole thing, and that will prevent juices from escaping. And I'll do the other side. And that is enough also, look, see, it's nice and brown, and I'll do the edges next. Again, no more than 20 seconds per side, and just keep turning it around. And my joint is brown all over and beautifully sealed, so I can just remove it and put it back on the original board over here for later. And now I can move on to the preparation of the soffritto. Large clove of garlic, and I'll squash it with my knife. You will have noticed also that I'm using a wooden chopping board for my vegetables, and I've used a plastic one for my meat. Whenever I can, I always try not to use wood if I'm working with meat, pork, or even beef or lamb, whatever. That is because wood is quite porous, and it's not the end of the world as long as you clean it, but it will absorb a lot of the blood, and it could be dangerous in terms of clearly Salmonella, E. coli, and so on. So if you use a wooden chopping board to do your meat, do ensure that you thoroughly clean it afterwards. And if you'd like to see how I clean mine whenever I do clean it, let me know in the comments, and I'll show you how I do mine.
You also got to remember that I've got about 20 plastic boards, chopping boards in the cupboard, so he's got
She does, yes.
a big selection.
So I will be quite generous with my soffritto, and these are a couple of sticks of celery. The first thing I'll do, I'll remove the stringy bits, which are not very pleasant. So very easy to do, go from the bottom and just peel them off. And I'll chop it in relatively large pieces because this is going to be cooking for a long time. Earlier I scrubbed a couple of carrots, so I'll remove the head and the bum, or the bum on the head, whatever. And just like I did with the celery, I'll do them in relatively large pieces. Very large onion, and again, as I mentioned, I'm going to be very generous with my soffritto as it will be cooking for a long time.
Bit of a beast.
So having removed the skin or the peel, I'm going to cut this in half first, and each half I'll cut into 4 pieces, leaving quite big. And I've got this little piece of meat left, so I'm going to be chopping it also, and that will be going in with the soffritto. Same oil, no need to replace it, as I only used it for a few minutes, and I start with the garlic. And I left it to sizzle for about 30 seconds, and I can add the rest of my vegetables. And I'll start with the onions and everything else. And as that is the same oil I used to seal the beef, it will release even more flavour. And before I forget, I'll also add then a few bits of beef that I just chopped. And after an initial blast, I'll turn the temperature down slightly, still medium-high, and I will leave my soffritto to now sizzle for about 3 to 4 minutes until it's slightly soft. And I'll give this a little stir to ensure that everything is browned all over. And as I mentioned earlier, this is something which my mum used to cook a lot, and once her and my dad came to visit us here in the UK from Sicily, and on the way home back from the airport, she said to me, "Oh, by the way, I've got a joint of beef in our case, in our luggage." So I asked her why. She said, "Ready to make this dish." And I had to laugh actually, because quite clearly we do sell beef over here, but in Sicily they obviously believe, and to an extent it's true, that the meat is really, really genuine. And she was so proud that she came with this joint of beef with a hole in the middle already. And the day after she made this very, very dish. That was funny. Also, they used to come and visit, and they would bring all sorts of goodies. And I remember this particular occasion when they opened their case, and it was full of wine, cheese and pasta, all sorts of goodies.
They used to also have these sort of plastic containers.
Yes.
And they'd come and they'd be like 5, I don't know, I want to say 10 litres of
olive oil.
And then
wine.
different one with wine. And they'd be in the overhead compartment, you know, back in the days before 100 millilitres was a problem.
And one time she said to me that she had so much weight that she had to pay excess luggage. And but there you go, that's a good memories.
Yeah, when they used to come, I always used to take them to the supermarket, because back then they didn't have big supermarkets like we did.
No.
And then she was able to understand that in actual fact we did sell pasta and cheese, bless her, so she'd calm down bringing it all over.
She stopped.
I think the 60 quid spend on the excess baggage did it.
Yes. So my soffritto has been sizzling for a good 5 minutes, and that is a good time to now add my beef, and I'll just press it to ensure that it's level with the top. And I'll start adding my tomato passata first, and I'll put it all over, also to ensure that the beef sits on the vegetables and not on your pan, otherwise it could burn. And I will be complementing the tomato passata with some plum tomatoes also.
Ooh.
This is obviously very subjective, entirely up to you, but I do like to combine both together, as this is a little bit sweeter than the tomato passata. There is more, another little tip which my mum taught me, a little tomato puree. I'll put some inside my can, about 1 dessertspoon. I'm going to add a little water.
What's that, about half?
Just under half.
Can't see, like a bottomless pit down there. Oh, there we go.
If you look, it's just under half. And I'll stir it in. Back to my tomato passata carton, and I'll pour it all in. This is now almost squeaky clean. And I'm going to seal this first to ensure that I do not make a mess.
Blimey.
And then I'll give it a good shake.
Please note I took a step back, everybody, just in case there was an explosion.
And I'll pour it in, this time on top of my beef. And this will ensure that there is no waste, and also I get to dilute my tomato puree in a nice way. So my sauce has reached the boil. I've got a little bit of my breadcrumb mix left. There is no harm at all in putting it in. All it's going to do is just add more flavor. And this time I'm going to add a tiny little amount of salt all over my sauce. It's now boiling quite vigorously, so I'll place the lid on and I'll turn the temperature down. If you look here, it's number 9 at the moment, and I'll turn it down to number 2, like this, like so. And I'm going to leave it for about 2.5 to 3 hours. This is brisket, so it's quite tough, so it's going to require a long time to cook. Long and slow is the trick in this recipe. If you've got a gas hob, turn it as low as you possibly can and leave it for 2.5 to 3 hours. Do not worry about consumption and power, because actually when it's on a very, very low, it's very similar to the same electricity used by a slow cooker, because it doesn't take a lot to get the temperature and actually uses only a little amount of electricity. In our case though, we got solar panels, so cooking this during the day obviously is an advantage. And what I'll do, in 2.5 hours I'll turn it off and I'll leave it to cool down naturally, because we're not eating this until 6 o'clock this evening, and at the moment it's morning. And also the meat will be easier to slice, and then I'll do some pasta as well. So I'll see you this evening when we are ready to eat. Arrivederci for now, see you later, thank you, bye. 3 hours on and my meat is ready. I'll show you what I do next though, because it's still very early and I do not have to slice yet. So first of all, look, the sauce has changed into this beautiful, beautiful color. And what I'll do, I just blend it off by the way, I'll pour some of the sauce on top of my joint, like so. And if you look, it's still retained its shape, which is perfect, ideal for carving it later. And it's
the
still
tomato's
sitting.
still whole as well, look at that.
Yeah, and it's also great for carving it later. And I'll put the lid back on and I will leave it for an hour. I will do a quick taste to ensure that it's okay. Oh god, it's absolutely delicious. And I also meant to add, if you were to cook something like this and you're using a brisket, like I'm using 3 hours, that'd be perfect. But you can also use a more expensive piece of meat if you want, like top side or the silver side. But be careful. Number one, I don't think it's necessary, because brisket will release so much flavor. But if you're using something which is a little bit more tender, do not cook it too long, maybe 2 hours top, because you want it to retain its shape. Once this has cooled down, I will be slicing it. And silver side or top side, if you cook it for very, very long, it won't just fall apart. So be very careful. Anyway, leave it for an hour and then I'll slice it and we can see what it looks like then. See you soon. Bye. And I'm ready to slice the meat. And that's been cooling down, and it's going to be much, much easier to cut now. There. We received a phone call, they're on the way, so I'll put this also back on the hob so that it keeps it nice and warm. So first things first, I'll go and remove the toothpicks. And if you remember, I left them slightly out so that I can easily find them. And there is another one. And here is my last one. And yeah, they've done the job really well. If you look, it's still in one piece and very, very compact. String next, so I've got a couple, one here and another one here. There you go. And be careful as you remove the string, actually, because you could get very excited and easily you could...
The stopper's fallen off the side.
Yeah, you could easily spoil it.
It could fall apart, couldn't it? I
Yes,
suppose it's so tender now.
And these have done the job, because the idea was that the filling didn't come out. It is 4 of us eating, so I aim to do 4 nice large slices. So firstly, I'll square my joint up.
They look lovely bits too though, don't they? Ooh.
Indeed, and these ones here, I'm going to chop in little pieces first, and I will add them to my sauce in a moment. And back to my joint. Halfway point is here, and I'll do the first slice, about 1 centimeter thick. And I'll put my hand over here to ensure that I do not break it. Clearly important that your knife is nice and sharp. And here it is, look, here is my filling, looking very good. Slice number 2. You'll find that the last slice is always the more difficult one, because clearly it's not as thick. So very gently put your meat on the board and cut through it horizontally. And I'll put them in a bowl to start with. Perfect. And I'll put a little cover on to keep them warm. And as I mentioned before, the little bits, they can go back in the sauce and they will provide a beautiful texture with my pasta. Water is boiling, some salt, And today I'm going to be using rigatoni. Choice of pasta is entirely up to you. You can use spaghetti, you can use long pasta, short pasta, fresh pasta, it doesn't really matter. This sauce will go everywhere. Also, you can use this sauce as the base of a lasagna if you like, or pasta bake. It's very, very versatile. The pasta is cooked and I've just drained it, and here's my sauce. And as this sauce is very liquidy, you do not need to keep any of the water. We are not making a creamy sauce today. And before I do anything else, I'll add a little sauce to my pasta and I'll mix it together. A little more. Wonderful. And I'll pour it in here. And you will recall that I put all of the bits of meat with my sauce, so I'll just spread it on top of my pasta alongside any vegetables and so on. Absolutely beautiful. Here is my meat, and I will start moving it inside the bowl. I better patch it up, otherwise there are going to be fisticuffs going on the table.
Too right.
Yeah, this little one will give it to Julie. And you might have guessed it, I'll finish it off with a little sauce on top of my meat next, which in the meantime has cooled down slightly, so that will warm it up also. And finally, a little shower of Parmesan cheese. Actually, this isn't Parmesan, this is Pecorino. But Parmesan or Pecorino, entirely up to you really. You can put some basil or parsley on top. I'm going to leave it simple today. That's the way my mum did it. And if you look here, I've got quite a bit of sauce left over. This will freeze absolutely perfectly. I suspect my son is going to take it home, but I'll quickly taste it and then we better eat before the pasta gets cold. I'm going to pinch a little piece of meat. Oh, incredibly delicious. Just like what my mum makes. It's beautiful. Make it, it's a little bit fiddly. More than fiddly actually, it is easy enough to make. It's just, it takes a long time because, you know, you cook it for 3 hours and so on. But it's definitely worthwhile. And in them 3 hours, do something else. Arrivederci, grazie, thank you for watching it if you watched to the end, and buon appetito. Ciao.